Hello, everybody. We are very happy to welcome you here at our second panel discussion, which is called Literature and Activism, the Place of Queer Writing in Society. I'm pleased to introduce, first of all, the moderators. And the moderator to my right is Ismar Hačam. He was born in Bosnia, in Livno, in 1991. And he studied German literature in Sarajevo, Berlin, and Würzburg. And he works as a freelance translator and assistant at LCB.
And to my left side is Volya Hapeyeva. She was born in Belarus and is a poetess, a writer, critic, philosopher, and holds a PhD in comparative linguistics. And she has also worked with techno DJs for lyrical performances of her pieces. And was also a scholarship holder at the LCB.
And today we have a very interesting discussion, and the people who will take part in this discussion, we will present them briefly, just for you to get some understanding with whom we are talking to. But if you are interested in them in more detail, you have special booklets. You can read their biographies in full, and also the statements which they wrote specially for this panel discussion. And during our discussion, we will appeal to their statements as well. And so let us introduce briefly our panelists. And I would like to start with Zsófia Ban, who was born in Rio de Janeiro, and she grew up in Brazil and Hungary. And she works as a writer, essayist, and literary and art critic. Zsófia. Ebru Nihan Celkan is an author and teaches dramatic writing at Sabancı University in Istanbul. And she deals in her plays with Turkish society, its taboos, and also takes part in the international playwright project Krieg in Frieden, War in Peace. Ebru. Jacek Dehnel comes from Poland. He's a Polish poet, writer, translator, and painter. And he studied literature and philosophy, and Dehnel lives and works in Warsaw. Jacek. And Feryna. Feryna is a poet, publicist, activist, comes from Czech Republic. And in 2017, she founded the collaborative queer project Access.
Next with us is Davit Gabunia from Georgia, right ahead. He's a playwright and novelist, and the themes of his texts are mostly among other things, deconstructing the traditional gender roles in Georgian society. And he received the Saba Award, one of the most prominent literary awards in Georgia. Uladzislaŭ Ivanoŭ from Belarus is a translator, poet, sociolinguist, and researches the Belarusian old belief. And he has translated French classics such as Dehnel, I think, yeah. Also works with queer topics. Johannes Kram is a publicist and playwright from Berlin. He writes the Nollendorf blog and has released a book about the awfully nice homophobia in the middle of the German society. And last but not least, Karol Radziszewski from Poland is an artist, photographer, painter, curator. He publishes a magazine with the amazing title Dick Fagazine, and I just love it. And he founded the Queer Archives Institute, which he will present tomorrow at 5 o'clock in the ERCA. Okay, before we get to discussion, I just have two things to mention. The first thing is playful. We have some chalks there next to the piano. So during the day, today and tomorrow, you feel free to take them and write something if you so wish. Draw, do whatever you like with them. They're in beautiful rainbow colors. And the second thing is, for the ones that haven't heard it already, for the participants, please take your contracts to Felix Schiller in the first floor, and you'll get the money. Okay, I hope that you've had your dose of caffeine after the tasty goulash, and I think we can start with the discussion now.
Yeah, and our first question will concern this problematic topic when we speak about activism and literature. What is activism, and how much activism is in literature, and how much literature in activism literature? And for example, we will address our first question to Davit, but sure, after Davit shares his opinion, all of you are welcome to add or comment from your perspective. So very often activist literature or literature which present marginal groups is accused of being not true literature. So are there any examples, or are there any signs of real literature from the perspective of Georgian experience, your personal perspective?
Thank you. Yeah, that's a very broad issue, but I'll give you some Georgian context to it. In 2005, when I started writing myself, it was impossible to get published as a gay writer or a queer writer, so no one would take it seriously. So this situation has changed since then. But always there is a criticism in the society, and there is a criticism, I don't mean the backlash from the society, I don't mean the groups that have nothing to do with the literature, but I mean the literary circles, the establishment of literary critics, very well-known established critics of older generation mostly. They say, oh, okay, this is the feminist guy, this is a feminist author, this is the gay author, this is a trans author, or whatever. So it is still there, and you are labeled with this, and then you are not sort of allowed into the circle of serious writers, or real writers, so to say. So this is the situation generally in Georgia, and I think that it will be familiar to a lot of you in your own context. But one thing I also wanted to mention about Georgian context as for the activism and literature. So nevertheless, they go alongside, so hand in hand. So without activism being published as gay-themed or queer-themed, also wouldn't have been possible. So as the activism develops in the country, so more and more voices are heard, more and more writers are encouraged to write on those topics. So yes, I used to be an activist. 10 years ago, I said, no, this is not for me. I quit from this active participation in the NGO life and activism in general, and I switched into writing. But not seeing the merit and not being thankful to the activism would be kind of inappropriate for me, because of those guys who stand in the streets, who shout, who wave the flags, who do a lot of work and help victims and so on and so on. It is possible for me now to be published and to be widely read by the audiences. So there are two sides always in this issue. So one is that you don't want to be narrowed down and understood and labeled as an activist writer, but you take huge benefits from the activism. So this is the issue maybe we need to address too. So.
And can I just shortly ask another question, and then we can go further? You wrote also in your statement that when you got published, you, in a way, forced critics to analyze, to read gay literature. And even though they didn't read it the way maybe you would like it, they did read it.
Yes.
Is that a form of activism? Is it also vice versa? Not only that activism helps literature, but can literature help activism?
Yes, in a way? It definitely can. So I'm not. I'm old enough not to be so naive or gullible to believe that literature can change anything in the world or art in general. But somewhere deep in my heart, or somewhere in the back of my brain, I still believe it can. And when I'm saying that I used to be an activist and I left and I chose literature over activism, so it still contains the dose of activism. So I'm not trying to be moralistic in the book and black and white and teach the readers what is right and what is wrong, that violence is wrong and so on, homophobia is wrong. But I take a character who is a homophobe and who, doesn't have horns or the devil's tail or something, but he still is an usual homophobe, and I write a book from his perspective. And then they have to read it, and then they have to analyze it. So yes, maybe that's some kind of activism as well. But myself, again, I don't have anything against activism, and I'm not diminishing the importance of activism. But saying that I'm not an activist, I'm kind of honoring them because they are doing much more. And they are risking their lives sometimes and risking a lot. So that's why I respect all the activists, but I choose the slow motion or a long-term project which is called literature.
Thank you.
Yes.
Maybe,
Put this down, this phallic symbol.
yeah, maybe Jacek, because you also mentioned in your statement this problem of normalization of gay literature, and kind of, I know that some gay writers really feel offended, like they are interpreted only as gay writers because, as they say, we have other identities as well. So how to make maybe critics to look at other possible identities, or maybe vice versa, we shouldn't?
Well, you know, the problem is that often whenever you just touch any LGBT subject, your book or movie transforms into an LGBT movie, which is not necessarily true. I just came here from a film festival in Wrocław, and there was this great movie which was called The Heiresses, from Paraguay, I think. And it was a story of an elderly lesbian couple who goes through times of crisis. And they are quite rich, but they have to sell their family's silver and pictures, etc., etc. It also creates a tension in their relationship. And this was a movie about crisis, basically, and about how long-lasting relationships cope with crisis. But the thing is that only because those two characters were female and they were lesbians, it was a lesbian movie. Well, it wasn't. You know, if the couple was straight, would it be a heterosexual movie? No, it would be just a movie about a crisis. So there is a certain problem here that you can speak about anything you want, but if you include LGBT subjects, it suddenly is treated as an LGBT movie instantly, or a book. Also, I think that there is some lines between activism and literature are blurred now. I mean, of course, you can have sort of almost social realism propaganda LGBT literature, and you can have on the other pole, you can have sort of pink literature that has nothing to do with politics. But there's plenty of things around it. Like, for instance, in my case, I don't have many LGBT subjects in my books, but then I'm quite active on Facebook, and this is quite funny because, you know, I suddenly meet someone in the street, and they tell me, you are one of my favorite authors. I read a lot of your Facebook statuses. It's just like, it's a weird thing to say and to hear if you write sort of serious literature with many pages, and people read just, you know, those scraps. But the thing is, it works. It works in a different part of the society, in a completely different way. And I think I also quite a lot used, or perhaps even abused, but I don't care, my position as a writer who gets columns in popular magazines to use it as a place to disseminate terrible homosexual propaganda. So I use that space to speak about homophobia and about various statements by politicians, etc., etc., etc. And I think it works. You don't necessarily have to include it in your books, especially that those things tend to pass quite quickly. I mean, homophobia doesn't change, but a particular statement of a politician is something which is important for a week or month. If you relate to that in your book, this part of the book will not work in a year or in 2 years. So I think it's better to use it for columns, for Facebook, for anything else. And I also think that it's important not only to publish in gay magazines, etc., but also to go, to stretch your hand and go further to the rest of the society in their magazines, in their TV programs, to shake their little world a little.
Yeah, like being a smuggler.
I would like to add one thing to the first question. Queer literature is very important for democracy, but it's especially important for non-democracy. On the non-democracy, on the Lukashenko regime, for example, queer literature is automatically, yes, it's automatically militantist, activist, activist literature. If you write in Belarusian, it's
already
yeah,
a statement.
it's a revolution. Yeah. And if you write in Belarusian about homosexuality, it's you're considered as a pro-Occidental agent. It's for me personally, queer literature in Belarus, it's a new form of literature engagée. It's very important for.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Sometimes the context, the political context, doesn't really give you a choice. Even if you're not a writer who is the activist type of person, sometimes just the general atmosphere or the general context forces you to become one, as it were, if not in another way than simply to give your name or to give your face to a movement or the cause of a minority. Like, for instance, at the moment, to be more specific, in Hungary, which is becoming, as our Prime Minister has so aptly put it, an illiberal democracy, whatever that means. You don't, and in the media, which has been by now almost completely co-opted and abused by the government, minority groups, including gays, are being attacked every day. Just very recently, the government very directly attacked certain workshops that are running under the aegis of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, saying that they are addressing topics like gender and homosexuality, and that this type of topic should not be funded by the government and certainly not condoned by the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, and so on and so forth. So the more the situation evolves into this kind of atmosphere, in the end, you realize you don't really have a choice. Do I want to become an activist or don't I? Even if you don't address the topic directly in your writing, you find yourself completely immersed in the situation, and you don't really have a choice. As far as my writing is concerned, every writer obviously chooses a different strategy. If you want to address the topic at all as a separate topic, either you address it head on and you produce something that is obviously regarded as gay literature, or the other strategy obviously is to try to naturalize the topic and to, use it as just another thread in your writing, which is more of what I do, actually. So it depends. That it's another question how you try to solve that problem, if it is a problem in your own writing. But as far as your own authorial persona, sometimes you just don't have a choice.
Thank you, Zsófia.
There was a very interesting case in Germany where what you just said showed how right that is. I mean, many writers said, "Oh, that's not important that I'm lesbian or gay," and they just regarded themselves as authors, writers. But when the Orlando attack happened, that changed. That means when we're under attack, I mean, that might be in your countries, but I mean, this was a global thing. And the discussion in Germany was like that well, this wasn't, I mean, the mainstream media and the mainstream politicians says this was an attack against our freedom, but they didn't say that this was an attack against the LGBTI community, and they didn't speak that out. They said, well, this is not a problem for, this is just a general problem. And everybody in Germany felt, no, that's not true. I mean, everybody in our minorities said, no, that's not true. This was an attack against us. And what happened in Germany was that authors, lesbian and gays, who never wrote about their being gay or lesbian, now spoke out. Like gay authors who just wrote about cooking or style stuff, started to write about, how it is to be gay in this society, or how it is to be lesbian in society. So I mean, the change from being just any writer or being an activist writer, it's the context, and we have to be aware that this context can always be there again, even if we don't feel that way, but there might be situations, and yeah, we should just be aware that the context is very important of our position on that.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah, Ebru?
Merhaba. I think I'm thinking from the beginning, because if you ask me this question, for example, 2 years ago, my answer totally was different. 5 years ago, it's totally different. And 10 years ago, I don't know if even I answer, there is a difference. There's a huge difference, of course, between literature and activism. But now, if, as my colleague said, if life addresses your life, if politics addresses your life become activism itself, every minute. So it's not about literature anymore. So it depends on time and space, I think, like every other thing. And I mean, perception is directly changing. This is what we are talking about when we say queer, isn't it, also? So if perception is something changing, for me, my perception is directly changed about time, which was linear. Now it's circles. We win, we lose. We win, we lose. So for me, every minute I live in my country, I see it as a part of my work and as a part of my activism. And activism, which means, I think, creating new kind of space for conversation and building up something, not destroying what is there, or not addressing others' life like they're addressing our life. So that's why I think literature is a huge and beautiful and a place that we have to protect, and the tool that we can create beautiful conversation to each other. So it's just, for me, it's just there to say who you are in literature or in activism. But it can be changed tomorrow. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah? Anyone else?
Karol, yeah. Maybe you have a different perspective because you're one of the, actually the only one here who doesn't write, but rather does another form of art.
Yeah, I'm a visual artist, basically, running the magazine, but it's still more like just interviews. But it's funny because I want to mention something that is connected with the definition of the word, because since the previous panel and also this one, I had a bit problem. Of course, it's just about the language, but we talk how language is important by using word queer, because for me it's not the same like LGBT and queer. We're constantly using these words in the same way. Sometimes it's a paradox. Even if we say what is literature, that is an activism, then we could ask what kind of activism. For me, it's hard to think about queer without politics and be engaged. While most of the people in the previous panel were talking about normalization, kind of acceptation and so on. And maybe for me it's also interesting because from Polish perspective it's something exactly between Western Europe, like Germany, France, developed queer cultures, that I see the people and artists searching for some niche, very specific topics, and the countries that are really repressed and you can really risk with doing something connected with queer topics. In Poland, we are in the moment that most of the activists are on the European grants with the rainbow, and the main goal is to be part of the society, to be nice, to have gay marriage, equal rights, and so on. And I totally understand that, and I support them. And I'm going to march and signing the letters and so on. But for me, being queer activist, especially from the art perspective, is something different. And sometimes even against somehow this activism. The perfect option is when you have parallel, these two groups that's more diverse. But queer is political, provocative, and I, as an artist, as a publisher, curator, rather trying to build a word that it's transnational and more against this nationalistic kind of perspective, which is also connected with the language and the word, and focus on showing the identities that are different and not fit to the society. And of course, the ideal word is like you can do it and you are not repressed, but still not trying to police the society, and it's a bit different approach, and also different risk, and also different goals. Also, both as an artist and both as an activist. And maybe it's just this theoretical thing, but I think it reflects also on the way how we are doing this in practice. Like it's a different way. And at the very beginning, I made the first openly gay exhibition in my country in 2005, and the title was not gay but facts, and everything was very sexual and provocative. And for many activists, proper activists at that time, the problem was that I'm doing a bad job against their work because I'm showing the bad face and sexual face of the queer community. But it spread out kind of the space for the other artists or the people who could express themselves. So I also thought that it's also the question, what's the goal of this activism and art?
Yeah, sure.
Well, actually, I don't know what to say because I think the previous speakers just said all. But when I think, in Czech Republic there was such a boom of blogs about queerness, about transition, especially for trans people. There is a lot of blogs. It's horrible because you cannot read that without, oh my God, what is that? Like a very naive and I just want to be a woman, blah, 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 blah. I'm in a wrong body and these cliches. But literature from, I think, 90s in Czech Republic started with as a therapy, like okay, I'm just different, I'm queer, and I can write about it, but it has no quality, but it has only the information maybe, but no quality. It's a problem with Czech literature. We have a lot of things about transition, about homophobia, about queerphobia, but not such the real literature. Like in 90s, there was a publicist called Teresa Spencerová, and she wrote a book about her transition called Tranny, in Czech Tranďák, and she's now a proto-fascist in some magazine, so it's like that.
Yeah, you never know what can happen later. Yeah, sure. Ismar?
Actually, thank you, Karol. You actually asked the question that I wanted to ask next about the... no, it's
fine. It's a good
perfect.
bridge. Yeah.
You just gave me the transition that we didn't have. So Jacek, for example, wrote in his statement, we took as a motto of the festival that pink, that the rainbow, that the glitter, they should get natural and transparent as they are. But we thought more about it and realized it's more of a question, like, is it really transparent and neutral? Is it really natural, or is it something inherently other and different? And if the literature becomes natural or normal, I don't have a better word for it, does this potential to be other, to be expressive in a different way, disappear? How do you see it?
Well, maybe I will start because it was my text. Well, I think that in every society where you have this fight this fight with homophobia and fight for your place in society as a LGBT group, you have similar situations. So you have those more radical groups and those less radical ones are searching for something new. The others want to merge in, and both of those groups are important because even if there are big quarrels between them, they actually cooperate. They persuade different parts of the society. You can have those people in Polish society who would say, okay, this is really wicked. I really like it because this is so strange, this is so queer, I'm for it. And then you can have those elderly ladies who are like, well, I don't have anything against them, but they really have to march with those dildos. And you know, in our society, in our minority group, we have people who can cooperate with those various groups and they can respond for their needs. That's why we have a rainbow. You know, it's like Captain Planet. You have different people with different abilities, and I think this works for both of those wings. So you change society in two different ways. One more mild, one more radical, and they're both fine. And this is actually not only for our own benefit as a minority group, but I think it's to the benefit of this whole society, that they have, that they suddenly find themselves in a completely different narrative, and then they can find some important things about their own sexuality, even if it's straight and average and popular. They can find completely different perspectives and change their own attitude, not only towards LGBT community, but towards various problems and aspects of life. And I actually concede how people go through this process of first accepting this terrible fact that two men can hold hands in the street, and then they gradually find different things about the world and they get used to it. It's actually quite interesting, and I think that we have to cooperate. We have to accept all those kinds of activism.
I'd just like to complement what you said with a specific example. We've had the gay pride march rather than parade since 97, and in the beginning it was basically only, well, very few people went, obviously, when it all started, and they were mainly parts of the gay, lesbian, and so on community. And then as the political situation evolved and altered to what it has now become today, you found more and more groups, more and more members of all kinds of different minorities joining the events, specifically for the reason you mentioned, because they recognized the possibility of not only their own position being made visible or represented by such an event, but for all kinds of other minorities or alternative groups that find themselves non-represented in the political sphere. And so by now, the Gay Pride March has become a very specifically political demonstration that no longer belongs exclusively by far to the gay community as such, but to all members of society, whether they belong to a certain specific group or minority, or simply just citizens who wish their alternative voices to be somehow made visible. This event, by now, every year, is seen very specifically as a political demonstration, and it is reacted to as such by the government. There were years when we basically had to march within a kind of tunnel, open-air tunnel, that was separated by a wall of police forces that separated us from the counter-demonstrators, who were very violent at times. And I brought something to show you, which I promise you I found by chance in my suitcase, because we recently had the Gay Pride Parade, march, as I said, in Hungary. And this is a pin that was created by an artist, a contemporary artist who happens to be a very good friend of mine. And this is the Hungarian flag, red, white, and green combined, as you can see, with the rainbow. Now, this is the kind. If it's all the flag colors, this is the pin that you would wear on March 15th, which is the holiday of the 1848 Hungarian Revolution. And so every year, all Hungarians who wish to commemorate March 15th in terms of revolutionary activity, wear this pin. Now, after the elections in 2010, which was actually the second round of the current prime minister's landslide victory, they decided to sort of co-opt this pin and make it their own sign, namely that they said that everyone who is a good Hungarian, in quotation marks, and everyone, therefore, who supports this kind of populist rhetoric should wear this pin no matter what, whether it's March 15th or not. So all of a sudden I found colleagues coming to teach with this pin, signaling very obviously their political attachments. And of course, this is the kind of co-option that this alternative wants to take back something. In the previous panel, there was a lot of talk about language being used in this way and that way, and being co-opted and abused. And this is obviously a kind of gesture, a counter gesture, to take back something that basically, if you're talking only about the flag pin, basically should belong to every Hungarian citizen, including minorities such as gays, who are currently being regarded as non-members of the polis, so to speak, non-accepted members of the national community.
Yeah, they are bad Hungarians.
Well, yes, they're bad Hungarians. They're non-Hungarians, and they're being treated as such. So this is a kind of visual activism.
Yeah. Thank you, Zsófia.
in or at work, if you will.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Okay, then. Yeah.
So if you allow me, I will pass to Belarusian because when I have a lot of emotions and a lot of impressions, I cannot speak English correctly. My friend, colleague, and the best poet, Belarusian poetess, in my opinion, will help me. Я хотел сказать две специфики квир-литературы у Беларуси.
I would like to add about the specificity of Belarusian literature and literature in Belarusian.
Перше, відрознення від заходніх наших сусідів, у нас ніхто не ведає, що ні Лукашенко, ні опозиція не розуміє, що таке квір, і тому вельми вигідно бути квір-письменником.
Unlike in Western country, in Belarus, like our government, Lukashenko included, they don't understand what it means to be queer and what is queer.
Куди страшнее и небезпечнее быть вот гей-письменником, лесби-письменником, феминистским письменником.
It's much more dangerous to be a gay writer, a lesbian writer, or feminist writer.
І другая річ, специфічна, можливо, в Європі це пройшли раніше, но у нас така специфіка, що ми всі квір-письменники білоруські, вони починали просто як письменники, і потім критики, журналісти зробили нас гей-письменниками, квир-письменниками, мы с этим згодны, и для меня это только гонор.
And the other specificity is that most our Belarusian queer writers, they started as like normal writers, but then it was the journalists and the critics who made us queer or LGBT writers, and in fact I'm proud that I'm a queer writer now, so and I'm thankful to them.
The first Belarusian queer
The first, yes. Thank you.
We were talking when we were preparing this discussion that there is in Belarus that there is actual censorship of writing, so you have to get your text approved in order to get it published. And we wanted to ask if there's something like that in other countries, maybe not official, but some kind of systemic
to be
censorship or self-censorship.
Yeah, precise is like that you have to, when your book is published in Belarus, you have to submit it to book chamber, and if they find something inappropriate, they can take the license from the publishing house, for example, and ban you selling the book. So do you have any of the kind or any other type of censorship, maybe?
Thanks God.
Yeah, Zsófia.
There's always economic censorship, when you can say, we're not censoring anyone, we're just not funding them. That's
also
as simple as that. We're not funding your book. You can get it published if you can, but we're not giving
any money. Ebru, and what's the situation in Turkey? Because we know that, like,
in
with
Turkey?
Erdogan, it's
no censorship, of course. What do you mean censorship?
We got you.
I mean, really, legally, actually, there is no censorship. I mean, if you are not on TV, and also if you are in TV, it's not, it's not outspoken. But on the other hand, there is a huge, huge press from your family, your relatives, and your friends. And which is, I think, more dangerous in a way, because the experiences in Turkey showed us that LGBT people or women are killed by their relatives in a third of two events. So you never know who is your enemy. It can be your father, it can be your mother, it can be your brother, sister, it can be your colleague. And so when you, for me, I see myself as a privileged, and I see everybody has privileges and everybody can be victims at the same time. So from my point of view, I always care about self-censorship because as I mentioned several times, I will mention again, they can censor one of my piece, they can censor my article, they can censor everything I write, but they can't censor me. They can only kill me. So the thing is, when I write, I don't care about the legal issues. I usually think about my mom. So yeah, and it's stronger than any other thing, I think. So yeah, we can talk about self-censorship in Turkey. So,
Thank you.
There has not been official censorship in Georgia since the lucky fall of Soviet Union in '91, thanks God. And but there was an interesting thing, well, regarding LGBTIQ and so on, literature and the authors who tried to write something like that. In 2005, when I mentioned that were my first attempts in fiction, so I wrote several short stories, and that was the time when the internetization of the country started. So there were like free platforms, there were literary forums that you could freely and anonymously publish some stuff. So I gained some reputation there with my gay stories. Back then they were naive, really bad stories, thanks God. And then my friends, a couple of friends, started thinking about maybe we should publish them, print them in literary magazines, and they tried. Without me, so because I was hiding behind my pen name. And they would address, all those magazines knew me as the translator, but they didn't know that these were actually my texts. And I got, so that's why they were not biased and they were not afraid to hurt me. So I got the feedbacks like, oh man, this author seems to be a real faggot. We are not going to publish this. Because when these friends of mine, when they would take the manuscripts to the magazines, they would say, these are gay stories. Says, okay, we don't have anything against them, but when they read it, they understood, oh, but these are really gay stories written by a gay man. So it was in 2005, and I hope those editors, I know all of them personally very well, won't hear me saying this, because they will be really ashamed to admit it now, in 2008. But all of them did that, all of them, without exception. All major literary magazines had that reaction to my particular text, and I'm sure there were a lot of more other authors. But nowadays, they know that it's a mauvais ton, it's bad taste. You are not allowed to say that. And they won't do it. Well, maybe they won't publish, they will find some other ways to say, but that's a very specific thing and very strange thing that is happening in Georgia right now. It's an extremely patriarchal country, very traditional and old-fashioned in that terms. And in social life, openness, it contains like risks for your life. And there has been a big clash and big attack on Idaho Day on 17th of May several years ago, when the thousands and thousands of people tried to attack the activists in the street, and it was a narrow escape. So it's dangerous. But nevertheless, the queer voices started to appear in literature, and believe me, myself being one of them, so there are several authors, maybe 5, 6 authors who openly write about those issues. While we get the reviews, no one has ever mentioned anything homophobic about this. I don't know why it is happening, and the backlash it doesn't cause. My point is that those books never cause a homophobic backlash. That's strange. Well, they find some other ways to say it's not so good, well written maybe, or something else. To be delicate with these issues. But in a country like that, like Georgia, which is a homophobic country, definitely, and life-risking for some LGBT people. It's strange, but I cannot really explain why. But maybe we've learned something. And these are, of course, in the first discussion today, there were, when we were talking about the language and then how imposed the language is, and how in many of our Eastern European and other countries, so the activism also gets this criticism that is all these ideas are imported from the Western country. In this case, yes. In this case, it is imported, and thanks God, because it's working. I mean, Georgia is the country which is aspiring and trying to get into European Union and associated with it, and so they are trying, and they know that you should keep your mouth shut at some issues. So this is the political correctness that was imposed from the Western, that can be explained by the Western influence, and that's good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. It seems like everybody wants to speak about language, so maybe we can address our portion, because we have our portion of questions concerning the language. And I don't know if maybe we can start with Ebru, because in your statement you mentioned something connected with this binary opposition, and that you can get the idea that language is something which divides us. And the thing is also when we start to use the language of power, so if we are kind of inscribed into the normal language or use the language of normality in order to view our non-normal ideas, don't we turn into those normal people and cannot already represent those non-normal ideas anymore? So I'm making allusion to Gayatri Spivak's famous text, "Can the Subaltern Speak?" So it's like, I mean, it's again the question about normalization and staying other. Also, how is it possible for you as writers with your text? Do you take any particular, I don't know, constructions or words? Besides, Ebru gave a nice example about Turkish variant of queer language, which used to be in Turkey some 100 years ago.
70.
Yeah. So can you speak more about that?
Yeah.
And
So actually, it's called Lubunja, and it's been used in 17th century. It's coming from there. It's still people, LGBT community, still using that language in Istanbul, mainly Istanbul. I don't know the other cities. And it's combination of 5 or 6 different languages, and it contains 400 words, which is mainly about description of male body, and also about protection. I mean, it's about police, it's about hiding something, and so on and so forth. So they created somehow because they want to make jokes between each other, which people doesn't understand, and also they want to create it because they want to give signals to each other about protection. So it's still people are still using it, and if they talk next to you, you don't understand it, obviously, because it's like language, other language. But this leads me a very, very important question, which I ask to myself. I'm living in Istanbul, and by the years, people telling me that I am living in the city which contains every kind of different cultures and so on and so forth. And the first thing I ask myself, which is the second biggest community in Turkey, Kurdish people, do I ever know just one word from Kurdish? And the answer is no.
I know.
Yeah, great, great. And the second one is Greeks. I don't know any kind of word. And now the Syrians are coming, and I'm originally from Syria, not me, but my grandfathers. Do I know words from Syrian? Yes, because my grandmother was talking it. So this thing is started to make me to think why I don't know. Even I don't ask, even they don't talk, even there's something going on there. So, but the bottom line is confrontation and conversation. And I finally find it out. It's so weird, but here in the Colloquium Freedom Project, because I'm trying to write a play about 2 women, a love story between 2 women, and that's why I really would like to learn German. So when I realized that I need to learn German because I want to get involved with this story and so on and so forth. So, because, for example, just take one word and try to find out what it means with the other languages, I find out that some words, which is not from my mother tongue, express my feelings stronger than my mother tongue. So I occupy words. I start to occupy words from German language. So then I start to occupy words from my grandmother's language. Then it's coming something else now. I'm occupying every kind of word I'm trying to find. But I'm doing this because actually I don't want to be defined and I don't want to express my feelings with a given language. I want to choose. And making queer characters, also I think they need a language. And yeah, it's also, I can refer to the first question. Activism is finding a way to create conversation. It's a great way to find out who am I living with and asking them what their language and what love means in their language. It can be a good start, I think. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you. So, please share your ideas about the language problem maybe you faced, because it's kind of considered to be a very patriarchal order, and it has been a problem for feminist writers as well, and they also kind of struggled with that. So maybe.
I guess I can say something about a particular experience I had with my boyfriend when we were translating a book by Edmund White, which is called Hotel the Dream. And it's a story that takes place in 1890s, end of 19th century in New York. And this is a novel within a novel, and the novel within a novel is a story of a 15-year-old boy prostitute who falls in love with a man. And Edmund White used a lot of slang words, of gay slang, that was used in 1890s. And this is actually preserved by two doctors who wrote it down in that period. So he worked on that book in the New York Public Library, and he went through lots of materials, various materials, and he recreated that language. But we don't have a 19th century gay slang in Poland. I mean, there might have been one, but nobody preserved that, and it's completely gone. There is a slang that is from the communist times, from 1960s, 70s, but you cannot use it really for that. And some of those words actually exist now in English still, but they had a completely different meaning back then. So for instance, shemale was a young boy who dressed as a girl and who was a prostitute in that drag. So we had to basically reinvent the whole language, and we had to reinvent the terms, but also the kind of humor that was between those sentences and those words, because there's a lot of puns, and you obviously feel that this is how this language worked like. So there was a lot of jokes, as you mentioned, as well. So we were using some slang we knew from the gay community of today, but shifting it a little, and we were inventing words, and etc., etc., etc. So I think it was quite interesting to look into a gay community that had its own language so long ago, and try to sort of invent your own language memory in the very process of translation.
And how was it perceived by the audience, this translation?
I don't think that they actually noticed that. They assumed I think they assumed it's a sort of workable language. I don't think that they actually realized the effort we put into it. Because, you know, if it works, it works. Who cares? But there was a lot of work to do that.
I've got the issue with this gay language, so-called. In my writing, not only in the novel, but in some plays as well, Well, for the playwright, it is the most important thing how a character sounds, because that's the only thing you have in a play, so it should sound somehow. The easiest for me was to write gay characters, because I never thought they should sound gay at all. So, and that's it. That is my answer. I mean, I will be very brief in this case. So there is, because I thought, I don't know why, I haven't thought about it that much, but when thinking about different characters, especially in plays and in a novel as well, so it was much harder for me to write a character who was like 67-year-old woman and to make it believable, very specific, but to write about a gay person, so this is not the dimension I'm thinking about at all. Because if this gay person is 20-year-old, then I'm thinking about 20-year-old character, not a gay character. Or if the person is 67-year-old woman and she's lesbian or with some other identity, then I'm thinking about the age, because to make it sound believable. So, but not the sexual identity at all.
Okay, good. Yeah, sure.
I just wanted to come back a bit again to this queerness, because it's connected with the language too. For example, the word gay was introduced in Poland in the 1888 or 89, and it's changed also the way the magazines and the community started to build. For example, the whole vocabulary that was used in the communist time suddenly started to disappear, because it was something old-fashioned, but also not modern. But it comes with the rainbow, and this, I call this rainbow colonization. I never use rainbow in my projects, for example, trying to find other symbols. The same, it's a bit with the language, but the problem is that my magazine, at the end, it's in English, but when I'm traveling to all these post-Soviet countries, Central Eastern Europe, I'm trying to dig and to find original words or some phrases, and I consider it queer before gay, because that's how you could dig in your own history of your country, because later everything is coming from the English. So at the end you could explain in English how it evolved, but this queerness before the LGBT movement, it's also in the language that because I do a lot of interviews, like oral history, that's also as a visual artist, is in a form of the video I will be showing tomorrow. But I found it very interesting how the way they talk, they could change the persona, and if they feel safe or not, how they express, and what kind of word they are describing also. And this is, for me, as artistically much more interesting. And in terms of the Polish literature, there was a book, probably you heard about it, Lubiewa by Michał Witkowski. The whole book is constructed only with that kind of communist time, queer, before gay language, used as a material to construct the narration and everything.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to add several things. One thing that came to my mind is that when even before the marches started in Hungary, there was a gay, lesbian cultural festival, as it was called, and there was a big debate, starting from '93 already, and not long after the political transition. And I remember there was a very fierce debate about whether to use the word pride or not, because in the in that specific Hungarian political context, it sounded too provocative. And usually, even nowadays, one of the questions you get is, "What are you so proud of? I mean, what makes you so special? Why is that an issue of pride? It's just another way of being or living." So the very word pride presented itself as a problem, and then there was this big debate, and then eventually, we all agreed that we should just take over this term as it was being used in the world elsewhere. The other thing is, so it's not obvious in what way certain terms will work in certain cultural, political contexts, and inevitably they will take on different connotations. So you need to be aware of that and wary of that. Not to offend other people's, possibly not to offend other people's sensitivity. The other thing is that in Hungarian, just as like I heard in the opening speech, I didn't know that, in Turkish as well, apparently there is no gendered personal pronoun. So when, even in Georgian. So that allows you obviously a much larger space within which to move and play with gendered beings, and of course to play much more with ambiguity. And you know, many times you don't necessarily want to express what exactly is going on gender-wise in the text, and you want to allow the readers more freedom to imagine for themselves what's going on. For instance, I have a story in which I specifically tried to play with that, and in the Hungarian reception, almost nobody perceived it as a lesbian story, whereas in Germany it was obviously perceived as a lesbian story. And that brings me to the third comment that I wanted to make, which is it's not necessarily, I think, about language, and I think there I would agree with you, and it's not necessarily about trying to produce a different kind of language, as I see it, but it's more about what in Hungarian would translate as, or from Hungarian into English would translate as expectation horizon. So what is it that the reader can imagine, which is a conceptual frame? What is it that can be imagined within a certain cultural, political context? Is it a context in which it is imaginable to read the same story as a heterosexual story or as a lesbian story? So that I think it's much more about producing a different kind of expectation horizon, a different kind of space which allows you to imagine more plural and gives you a much freer space within which to move, both from the point of view of writing and from the point of view of reading, of readership.
Yeah, Johannes?
I think there's a big misunderstanding with the word pride, because even in America, when it was used first, it was used the same way as you just described it. It was not, it didn't express that they all felt proud. They wanted to express that they don't want to feel ashamed anymore. So that was what they tried to express. So the word pride was not we are proud of something. The word was it was more or less saying we stopped the narrative about us. But the way people talked about gays and lesbian in that time during Christopher Street and now, I think it hasn't changed much. I mean, in a way, of course, people speak much more polite about gays and lesbians, and as you said, they don't criticize you very openly. But the narrative or the way it's perceived or gay characters are perceived is like, even in Germany, where we would say we are so advanced, it's almost the same thing. So the humor about gays and lesbian in Germany didn't change much till the 50s. You know, where it was still criminalized. I mean, I made some research on that. I mean, the jokes we use about lesbians and gays are almost the same. You know, maybe you even have the same joke about the soap in the shower. You don't have that one. Yeah. So that's kind of This is a joke which started where gays were criminalized, and you have to be aware of gays. There are they might rape you. So these jokes are still used in German TV today. And I addressed that, and I criticized them for that, and there was a big discussion blaming me for being not funny, being uncool and stuff like that. And I said, well, I'm 50 now and don't have to be cool anymore. And I can talk about the fact that we don't find that funny if the being lesbian itself or the being gay itself is funny. And in America, we had a debate during the 70s where they said, well, gay is not funny. It's not a joke itself. And this is, I think, before we talk about queerness or being fluid and stuff like that, I think we should start with the basic homophobic patterns we have. And this is what we should talk about.
And the language is one.
And yeah, and the language is one of them. And the characters, how the characters are defined. And even in Germany, we have, gay characters are rather very dramatized or very funny or very stupid, and mostly it's about being stupid. It's about being stupid. And that's funny. The funny thing about it is that they are stupid. Or maybe dangerous, or maybe both. Like dogs, and there's a song. I mean, that's why I wrote about the very nice, the very nice homophobia, because it's not only the right-wing people; it's the intellectual people who say, "Well, where's your problem? You're allowed to do anything now. Stop with your issue. You're putting it too much." And this is, I think, we have to discuss also. It's not just the right wing. It's also the left. It's also the intellectuals. And I think we have to be very we have to be nice, but we have to be wild, and we have to be radical with words and say, no, this is not funny.
And then it just came up to my mind. Then we actually what we need. Maybe it's too generalizing, but anyway, the change of the perspective, because it's not anymore, the function, so to say, of gay and queer or whatever we call it, the literature, it's less and less the issue of representation anymore. Especially in those societies, which like German society or in advanced, so to say, democracies. So, and now, for me personally, the other perspective, the counter perspective is more interesting. The characters, not the gay victims, not the flamboyant, something like cliche characters, but the ones on the other side, the ones who are observing, the ones who are attacking or doing something. So, because it's just more than a representation of authentic queer voices. It's becoming more than that.
Thank you.
Литература в Беларуси разбивает так само многие стереотипы и миты, и радикально меняет белорусскую мову, белорусскую литературу.
Belarusian literature also breaks certain stereotypes and changes the language itself.
Тут не только антипатриархальное послание, что антиколониалистское ее.
So it's both anti-patriarchal and anti-colonial.
Парадоксальный такой.
So it's a kind of paradox.
Наприклад, мене квир-література ввела в Білорусію таке інтимне письмо, у нас раніше такого не було.
For example, queer literature introduced intimate writing, which haven't been the case before.
У нас ніколи не було там ні Жан Жене, ні Віолет Лідюк.
So we haven't had those writers.
І ось якраз квир-література. І в чому антиколоніалістське послання? В тому, що воно почало відкидувати стереотипи, в тому, що по-білоруську нельзя сказати там про сексуальність, про кохання, про тіло.
And what was the anti-colonialism for Belarusian literature is what that Belarusian writers started to use the Belarusian language to talk about body and sexuality.
Ранні письменники використовували, класичні письменники використовували або польську, або російську мову, щоб описати сексуальність, фізичну.
And earlier Belarusian writers used either Polish or Russian to describe the sexuality.
А тепер, дякуючи квір-літературі, якраз реабілітуються, вертаються слова старобілоруське, створюються нові, і це заслуга квір-літератури.
And now, due to queer literature, Belarusian writers can use the Belarusian language to talk about body and sexuality using the Belarusian language. Thank you.
Okay, before we open the podium for the questions from the audience, we would like to address one more topic. We're short with time, so please keep it as short as possible, but we just cannot avoid it because a few terms have already been mentioned, like East and West, developed democracies and like new democracies, and the difference between a country that was, most of your countries were communist countries, except for, well, a part of Germany. And is there, can we talk? I mean, we call the festival Queer East, but do those terms still make sense to you? Is there a specific Eastern and Western activism?
Yeah, and the bordering question is about the capitalism, because so maybe it's the capitalism which doesn't allow us to be active, because, so to say, it uses this possibility to consume or grab everything. So you're gay, okay, we produce shampoo for gays, no problem. So like, you know, I mean, so capitalism tries to take any identity and turn it into market product and sell. So do you face this problem, like when your literature is tried to be converted into something like market selling product?
To be completely honest, sometimes, it was mentioned in this morning discussion, sometimes it helps, because definitely it's a niche and it has some advantages to it. Well, it's not only bad things all the time about being a gay or lesbian writer, so sometimes it really helps. And we're not against being sold. Like, everyone wants to eat.
True, yes. Karol, you mentioned this distinction between East and West activism, or...
Yeah, for example, the thing I will be talking tomorrow, Queer Archives Institute, the kind of artist-run institution that I started. At the beginning, I thought it should be just focused on Poland, and many curators from visual arts were interested only, like, you're Polish, concentrate on Polish topics, we don't want to hear other. Then, because I was traveling and extending, it was so-called Central Eastern Europe, but then when you talk about Yugoslavia, and some countries it's like South, and it's like very confusing to just using the term East, and also this Eastern Europe. Then I thought it should be just Queer Archive Institute, because if it would be like in States, it will be for the whole world immediately. And I used the English name because of all the languages that couldn't fit inside. But this East and West relation, it's constantly, and also because of the institutions, curators, they expect, because it helps, it's like a media, like when you have the contrast, it's easier to put kind of a problem, it's more attractive in a way, and it's really hard to redirect it. And all these things that people trying to call it like the belly of the Europe, like the Balkans and part of Italy and something, it just never works because it's so easy to say like East. But then what it's East and how far it goes.
Sure. Yeah. Marie?
Well, Czech Republic is something like a people who want to have a Western way of life or quality of life, but they have Eastern mind as a because of the life of communism, like this. And the same situation is at Prague Pride. Like it's a mainstream activism, so they have a business forum called Pride Business Forum, and as you said about the niche, so that's right. They have I think about 4 days about transgender tourism, about gay tourism, and only about how to earn money. They have a lot of workshops, like about PrEPs, like against the HIV and AIDS. But now, we have transgender tourism. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
And the problem in the Czech Republic and with Prague Pride is it's all about lesbians and gays. Not about bisexuals, not about trans people, not about all other minorities. Like, if we are talking about queer people, we are thinking about queer gays and lesbians, and it's a problem. And it's a problem for Pride. And I was last year at some discussion as a guest about bi and pansexuality, and it has something like an abstract or annotation, and it was like, bisexuals, are they lovers or just promiscuous? And it was made by Pride. Like, what the hell are we doing in Czech Republic?
Yeah. Thank you. Zsófia?
Yeah, sorry. I think there is very obviously still a reason for using the term East. I think it has pretty obviously reproduced itself, even though we thought that, or a lot of people thought that by having joined the European Union, this kind of division would go away. But It's apparent that it hasn't. It has reproduced itself precisely because of what you said, that there's no way you can make 45 years go away in not even a generation's time. So the way of thinking that the political atmosphere during socialism or communism that was generated and via which people were socialized is still very much present. And this is what the populist regimes are in fact using in a very functional, teleological way for their own political purposes, and for you know, the way they're using, for instance, since we're talking about language, populist language is another version of the kind of language that was used under communism, in a very rigid and very limited and very simplified manner to make the message very clear and easy to understand. And I think that's what the leaders of these governments have realized, and as far as I see it, they have basically reproduced by now a new version of this Eastern way of functioning, of course, combined with capitalism. But it's a nationalistic capitalism. It's a combination of both worlds, which makes it even more complex. But I think you need to understand what happened during those 45 years after the war in order to understand what's happening nowadays in these countries. And a lot of that is about language, is about the use of language. Just to give you a very specific example, in Hungary there has been a huge opposition, let's put it that way, to the use of politically correct language. Because people said, we don't want anyone to tell us anymore what kind of words we can use and which ones are not comme il faut. We just want to use any kind of language. You know, it should be in our freedom to use language in a free way. So even this kind of politically corrected language has been seen, even to this day, as a kind of imposition on the individual's use of language, and it has basically been unsuccessful as far as its introduction into Hungarian language, with the exception of very few words like Roma, for example, instead of gypsy, and so on, but very, very few.
Thank you. Jacek.
We tend to think that the Iron Curtain is sort of very rigid barrier between those two worlds, and it largely persisted until even after enlarging the European Union. But the thing, if you check it with the gay and lesbian and other issues of our community, it's not necessarily like that. To give you an example, in Poland we've never had any law against homosexuality. So we did have that in 19th century, which was imposed by Russia, Prussia, and Austria, which took over Poland. And then in 1920s or early 30s, there was a new code, and homosexuality was not in any way penalized then. After the war, it was not either. So basically, which is very strange, you could be imprisoned in the Western Germany for being gay, but you would not be imprisoned in Warsaw for having a sexual encounter with someone you fancy. But you could be imprisoned for telling a political joke or leaving a leaflet somewhere. So this question of liberty and law is very complex here. And as far as I know, in Germany in 1970s and 80s, there were LGBT groups cooperating with the church, also some of them with Catholic Church, which is very surprising for me. And then in Poland it's completely the opposite, of course. So, because the Catholic Church was, in parts of Germany, was a minority, and they understood, I guess, what being a minority is. And in Poland it's majority, so it changes the perspective completely. So, the Iron Curtain division is not that obvious, you know. Of course, it can help you with understanding some political issues, social issues, etc., etc. But as far as LGBT issues are concerned, it's not necessarily how it was. So it's not that you had this land of liberty in the West and you had those Stalinist gulags in the East. It's far more complex.
I think for me, it's my chance to meet with queer theory and feminist theory when I confront with these questions, because you know, it's obvious that saying this or this with the queer theory, we directly say not this one, I want all of them. So I don't see the point saying this is West, this is East anymore. In any kind of context, because I think we somehow dealing with awful white male world runner things. Straight. Thank you. So, and with the help of feminist theory and the queer theory, we don't need to deal with these issues anymore. Just that's why I'm saying the new language. Just leave them, forget about it. And the second one is I don't see myself as a minority anymore, because queer theory itself says that everybody can anything. So first of all, for me, I have to change my perspective like this and try to see the world like this. It can be something so positive, but the queer theory says that so. So I have to believe this in a way. And I see lots of solidarity potentials. It doesn't matter where it comes from. So, yeah. And I really reject this binary in every matter. I mean, East, West, black, white, I don't care about it. I want all of them and the colors between them.
The rainbow. Thank you. Dear panelists, if there is something else you would like to say, it's the last chance you can do it. And now I think we can address our dear audience. And if you have any comments or questions, you're welcome.
I also think the terms East and West are very misleading. There was this exhibition called Left Performance, where we could see that there was much more radical performances than Mariana Abramovic, and we find in the East, not in the West. So it make open cliches, it make open perceptions which are not really cover the complexity of these dynamics which are behind this dynamics of art, for example.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi. The question is for everyone, but I was hoping maybe, is it Ebru?
You can say whatever you want. It's Ebru.
That
you can say you.
That maybe that maybe you could start first to answer, but it's about intersectionality, and I'm curious in your different literary circles or even in your own work if that's something that is being addressed, being queer and you know, a minority or a different type of oppressed person, if intersectionality is a topic that is being addressed.
I mean, for my work, I don't choose to be intersexual, but it must be if because I'm writing about Turkey and the issues that we are facing every day, and like all other countries, I think we have these identities, yes, overlapping each other, And so that's why I think I'm asking lots of questions if I think someone is solid, because I don't believe solid personality anymore. So that's why I cannot say I'm dealing with it, I'm living with it. So yeah, it's in all my work, yeah.
Yeah, to everyone, so maybe...
Yeah.
Okay.
Когато ви слушах, в мен възникнаха две неща и един въпрос. Едното относно употребата на думата pride в български език.
While listening, there were two questions that emerged in my head, and one is about the use of the word pride in the Bulgarian language, in this case.
Освен за шествие на хомосексуални и ЛГБТ-жовни, тя се използва и за съобщество от лъвовете, казва се pride от лъвове.
So apart from using it as a gay pride as an event, in the sense of an event, it's also used to describe a group of lions or wolves, and it's still used in nowadays communication.
Другото относно, освен да пише, превеждаме от унгарски, понякога си позволявам, тъй като там няма родово определение, да не превеждам според интенцията на автора, да превеждам така, както на мен ми хареса, и тези стихотворения работят също толкова добре, колкото биха били с оригиналните родове.
And the other remark is that while I'm writing, I'm also a translator from Hungarian, and when I translate, maybe referring to your statement, Zsófia, when he translates, he decides which perspective he chooses. So he has to make a decision in the Bulgarian case, and it's not possible to use this non-determined way of describing it.
Въпросът ми е следния. Преди няколко години гледах един английски филм, който на български бях превели като гордост, по документален случай. Към всички.
So the question is, a few years ago he saw a film with the title Pride, which was an English film, a British film translated with the title Pride.
В него ставаше дума как по време на стачките на Маргарет Тачър група гей-активисти се включва в подкрепа на стачкуващите и какво се случва от това.
Describing a time of demonstrations against the policy of Margaret Thatcher and a group of gay activists who demonstrate against it.
Мой въпрос е, ако приемаме, че гей-активизма е място, където трябва да се извоюват политически права и свободи, виждат ли по някакъв начин гей-активизма като извоюване свободи и проверяване на други общности, освен на queer общността? И какви са те? Ако гей-активизма е място, където се извоюват политически права и свободи,
if gay activism, so the question is, if gay activism is a place where you can gain some political, you can have new political goals and try to reach them and to state your opinion.
Виждат ли някакъв начин гей активистите като хора, които извоюват права и свободи на други маргинализирани групи и какви са те?
Do you see any opportunity for gay activists or LGBT activists to fight for rights which are different from only the rights concerning these groups?
If I got you right, if you're a Georgian politician, you'd better stay away from LGBT issues because your political career will be over in one day if you state something positive or something pro-LGBT rights. So this is the situation in Georgia. So these are two different things: official political activism, or official being in politics, being in power. That excludes, well, especially in the pre-election times. And I think this will be something that many of my colleagues from here around us will agree with me in our different countries. So these issues are used to discredit politicians very often. If I got the question right.
I just briefly want to mention opposite, like in Poland, one of the most famous politicians is now openly gay, and he started as a regular gay activist, become a president of one of the cities, and he is successful also because he's totally openly gay, but he's addressing mostly the social issues and a lot of other groups that are not necessarily connected with the gay movement, and people appreciate that. So it's like classic kind of leftist stuff, but also in a populist leftist style somehow through the social media and so on. But for the other politicians, I would agree that it's also work a bit that way. It's like a Polish paradox that now we are developed in a way that both situations, we are like one of the most homophobic countries in the world, but in the same, because it's the topic, but in the same time, there is a moment that the openly gay politicians can be the most popular.
I was trying to find now the exact words how it was said, but the Warsaw Gay Pride for many years now has a number of different issues, and it's not only about LGBT people. It's also about disabled people. It's also about our relation towards the migrants and especially. The refugees coming to Poland. So all those issues are tackled within this major statement of the Equality Parade in Warsaw.
Johannes, you want to?
I do my blog now for almost 10 years, and the last years I write more and more about racism, because the structures of homophobia are so, in many ways, I mean, in some ways they're very different, but the same debates we had about homophobia, we have about racism now. And I think if we explain how homophobia works and how the oppression against gays and lesbians works, we can learn a lot about the other conflicts. And I think that the knowledge we have as a community, we should use for those fights also. I think we should be aware. I mean, gay and lesbian people are no better people, but they have other experience, and they should use that experience. Of course, to fight against racism, and we had that at the Gay Pride in Berlin now, that more and more that is issued. And also, yeah, we have to think about class. I mean, we have to think about, injustice and those problems. And I think we should use our experience and our channels and our possibilities we have to express that. And what for me is very important is, I think in every community, even in those countries where it's very difficult, it seems to work that somehow lesbians and gays kind of work together. And this is, in the history, lesbians have helped gays so much in the HIV thing and stuff like that. And this is not normal, and it worked. We can. This is a success story. What?
Normal.
No, but it is a success story how the different communities came together. And in Germany we have now the equal marriage, and everybody thought now the gay prides don't have any importance anymore. In Cologne the gay pride had plus 40% of participants, and even in Berlin I think more and more young people, of different kinds of political reasons came there. So that means it's more than an LGBTI movement. It's a movement about how politics can be done, how protest forms can be developed, and how we can work together, even if we are totally different on issues we all believe in. And I think this is a role model, I think, for many other political issues, and we should use that. We should use that. What?
We should transfer that, what you just said, to literature. So the same thing about literature. So
yeah.
No. That was just a comment.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, as a matter of fact, I think it works the other way around as well. Like, for instance, the Me Too movement recently. obviously had a lot to say to people who belong to, for instance, gendered minorities, who very often had very similar problems of harassment, and so yeah, it works the other way around as well. Yeah.
Thank you. We have.
Just maybe a very short comment that it works other way around. If we think really critically, we think of acceptance of diversity within society, but in the same time we see that there's a lack of acceptance sometimes within the community. If we think of, you've mentioned as an enemy, as we usually call it, like from feminist critique, white heterosexual male. What about white gay male? Sometimes, in a way, if we think of accepting, for example, if we think of gay men, feminine guys or trans people, I mean, they are still marginalized, and it's still a problem. So, I mean, this is not the enemies from the outside. We still need an acceptance within. So, just as a
just one remark here. I don't know if you've heard, but there's something called kinder that's going to appear. So this is kind of grinder, but it's kind, so you cannot be transphobic or racist. So the answer was not find the problem within the community. It's just let's create another app. You cannot be racist here, but you still can be racist on Grindr. So I think it's completely, it's actually a very capitalist idea of solving the problem. You just get another app. But of course, the problem is there. The problem is there, and it's not going to erase the racism from Grindr, for example.
Yeah, just because we were talking about Pride and Pride marches, just the first Pride, I think, was Stonewall, and it was black transgender women. So, of course, we as queer can relate to other struggle, because some of us queer are black, poor. So, of course, there is no like white gay male representing our communities. So, like, of course, we have to be intersectional, because queer people can be a lot more than just queer. So it's part of our identity. And I had the impression that it wasn't that clear that Pride has to be political and a riot, and has to address other problems, because we are, we as queer are a lot of, we have a lot of identities. So yeah, that was just this. Not really a question, but
a comment. Thank you. Yes. Thank you. Anyone else?
In the back.
Thank you. I have a question on identification. I'm very curious, in each of your countries, who produces queer culture? Are the queer people or random people who just decided to write queer literature? Thank you.
It's mostly authentic. Mostly. Big majority. Well, that's it. That's the answer.
In my country, nobody says, nobody comes out and says that I'm queer. I never heard something like that. But lots of people say others that they are queer. So I don't know, actually. In Turkey, I mean, I never. There is no queer literature in the section. There is queer theory section now in the. No. I mean, there are lots of. For example, the writer we all listened yesterday is, I mean, very well-known queer writer. I mean, so. But I told him queer. He never told himself as a queer. I mean, for example, for me also, I never say I'm queer. I see it somehow is a theory itself living there. And yeah, I don't know. I don't label, I think. Or people label others. in my country. Yeah.
Not in literature, maybe on Grindr, yes, but or Kinder.
In Hungary, the usual case is that such issues are addressed much more readily by the visual arts, and that literature usually sort of lags behind, is much slower to react. And yeah, there's as far as Hungarian literature is concerned, I couldn't say that there is such a thing as queer literature. There are certain authors who address that topic, either directly or indirectly, but they're not usually labeled as queer authors. And certainly no one that I know would want to take on either that label or, in fact, any other kind of label, since being labeled was something that, again, belonged to, or still belongs to, the tradition or the legacy of communism. And a part of the freedom of the era after the political transition is that you do not wish to be labeled anything. So in fact, for instance, a lot of women writers refuse to have their stories or poems published in women's authors' anthologies, because they say, I'm not a woman author, I'm just an author, which of course can be endlessly debated and has been endlessly debated, and I always find myself in the middle of panels that, you know, try to answer, is there such a thing as women's literature? Is there such a thing as blah, blah, blah? But I think, again, you cannot disregard the legacy of the period before the political transition, which is still very strong, and for which reason there's still a very strong reaction, even to the very label of feminist. Being a feminist critic or a feminist writer, most people would want to stay away from that and put a very big distance between themselves. And very few people would want to be seen as such.
True. Yeah, Johannes?
I don't know if that's because I'm not Eastern, but I like to be labeled as gay.
Person, anyone else? Do you see? Yeah, there is one more question there.
My question refers to what can be imagined, and of course what can be imagined is determined by language, a certain language horizon and experience, and that refers to you, Davit. You talked about your writing as a playwright. Do you hear me? Yeah. And you said you never create gay-sounding characters. Is it to avoid stereotypical representation? And how you characterize characters that are non-heterosexual or non-binary?
Because I do believe, I'm a strong believer. Well, I'm not aware of any specific gay slang or something which similar to what you mentioned or you mentioned in Georgian language. There has never been something like that. That might be one thing. But another thing is that there is no such thing as gay language. I'm not kind of avoiding something or trying to hide something and to break the stereotypes. The gay image, what you were discussing, is completely constructed, and completely constructed mostly by TV. And these cliches or cheap TV series or comedy shows and stuff. So, and this is just not true. So I'm trying to be truthful to the characters, to the needs and requirements, to the features or whatever the character has, and not necessarily create a cliche. So yes, I'm trying to avoid the cliches, but because I don't believe in them. I don't find them in the streets, in life, because I've met a lot of gay people in my life, and hopefully I will meet more. And it's really hard to categorize them. They're so different. And all of them are gay. Well, all of them, like big group identifies themselves as being gay, and they have nothing in common. So which one is, well, I mean, they are so diverse. They're so different. And which one could be representative of these identities then? I don't know. So that's why I don't think, anyway, in my case, I'm trying to avoid this kind of stereotypical representation, and to cut it short, it's not the most important thing in a character's identity that he or she is gay. Yeah, that's it.
I love the sentence, everybody is gay. Great sentence, congratulations.
Did I say?
Yes.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
There's of course this problem that you meet someone and he says, oh, I have a friend whose name is John and he's gay too, you have to meet him. Yeah. And you're like, yeah, I have a friend who's married and she's straight, you have to meet her. You ask what is imaginable, and I had this very strange experience a few years ago when I published my novel Saturn. I'm actually going to read excerpts from it down there at the water line soon. And this is a story about Francisco Goya, the famous Spanish painter, and his son and grandson. And we have a set of letters that Francisco Goya sent to Martin Zapater, and they obviously had a life-lasting love affair. This is very sexual, this is very charged, and there is plenty of both lyrical and very vulgar sentences which give it straight away that they were not straight. And this is part of the story. It's not the most important part of the story, but it's part of the story. And in the reviews, people would say, well, how he could invent those letters of Goya? I never invented anything. I just translated them to Polish from the English translation, and that was it. I just used verbatim Goya's letters, and people were like, they thought it was not imaginable for them that you can actually take an actual person, a well-known person from history, and give away this person's secret. And the secret is, it's just lying there. Everybody knows that if they read anything about Goya. But for people, it was appalling, and it was quite surprising for me that they didn't even try to check if the letters are real. They are. It was just, blank space. No, it could not have happened. No. So this is one of the problems, that even if you give something which is obvious, people will tend to say, no, not really. No, perhaps they were just friends.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think my question was also aiming to what, especially the discourse around ambivalence and non-binary perspectives, and especially when it comes to translation. And you translate from a language that has a neutral form, and translate these forms into a language that doesn't have it. And then when it comes to theater translation, where directors would say, okay, get rid of the language, just put a so-called non-binary character on stage. Then we lose the power of language as a emancipatory tool, and that's there.
Yeah, that inevitably comes up as a problem, and each time you get the question from the translator, what do I do? And then you have to be your own hangman, basically, and choose. Expressions like they may have already become generally accepted in English, but certainly if anyone were to use it in Hungarian, it would lead to endless misunderstandings and nobody would know what the hell was going on in the text. Who's they? You know, who are all those other people? Nobody would understand. So, yeah, you have to somehow, in certain cases, respect the limits of your language and try to compensate in some other way. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, Jacek, want to something?
Sorry for speaking again. I had this experience once. I wrote this text which was about a universe of women. And it ended with, and the whole text was using only the feminine nouns, because we have feminine, masculine, and neutrum nouns in Polish. So this was a world of women with only feminine nouns in it. And it ended with one of the girls finding a boy in a cabbage, and the boy is masculine. So it was the end of this matriarchate. And this was a text for an artist, for a visual artist, for catalog of her paintings, which featured women only. And it was to be translated into English. And the whole point of the text was missing there. And of course, you have to work a lot to find only feminine nouns in writing a long story in Polish. So you could feel the tension within the text, and that was one of the pleasures of reading it and writing it, that it was stretched. And then in the English version, my translator, she used many words from French, like courgette and other that had this ending, which gives you an idea that there's something feminine in it also for the English reader. But then the whole point of the text was missing. So yeah, as Zsófia said, it's just the limits of particular language that you translate it into and the language that someone is translating from. You cannot do anything else with it. You just have to accept it.
Yeah. Thank you. I think it's actually a great new topic which we can discuss next year. Translation as activism in gay literature and gay studies, queer studies. And I suggest we close our panel and thank everyone, our dear panelists, our beautiful audience, and then we can continue with our program. And Thorsten wants to say something.
So thank you very much to all of you, and of course, thank you very much. Wow. This is a strong team. So when we were planning these 3 days, we had in mind, like, who will come here on a Thursday in summer? So thank you very much for being with us. Maybe you've realized it's beautiful weather outside. Some smart people are already sitting on the terrace, so I suggest we all continue outside at 5 o'clock. Gabi Leupold will give an introduction to her radio play in front of the house, and at 5:30 there will be reading and talk with Davit and Angela outside on this upper stage, and then later in the evening we'll continue close to the lake. Yeah, and at 5 o'clock there will also be this performance in the Erker-Raum, I think? Yeah, with Misha Badasian. So walk around, see what's happening, and have a nice evening. Thank you.
Thank you.